Hello there, and welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week, alongside guest Dennis Keithley from Podcast Stardust, we discuss the fourth episode from Ahsoka titled Fallen Jedi. Before we get started, I'm inviting you to join the conversation with us. We can be found on Twitter and Hive at Force Ghost Pod. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok just by searching Force Ghost Conversations. Also, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your listening site of choice. Plus, Force Ghost Conversations is live on Patreon. If you are a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Finally, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it's time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, everybody, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, and I'm so excited for you to listen to our special episode with guest Dennis Keithley from Podcast Stardust. Yes, one of the podcasts that I have admired for quite some time now. Got to meet Dennis at Star Wars Celebration Anaheim. We went to the 20th anniversary Clone Wars panel, or Attack of the Clones panel together. It was a great time, so really thrilled to have him on the show to talk this really great setup episode for Ahsoka, episode 4, Fallen Jedi. So, of course, on the other side of this little segment here, we will have that full discussion for you then. And before we get into that, though, we do have some news to cover in this week's Cloud City Gossip segment, and let's get right into that. So first, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny has now released on physical media this past week. So if you are a collector of physical media, much like myself, be sure to add this item to your collection. You don't want to have that one outlier out there that's missing, folks. You want to have the full collection, whether it be 4K, DVD, Blu-ray. Go out and support this great movie. I mean, and also, I don't know if the digital version has this, but there is the score-only version of the movie too, which just features John Williams' epic score. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way to celebrate John Williams and this incredible film. So be sure to go out and get your copy today. Second, Disneyland has announced a Season of the Force event. Taking place from April 5th through June 2nd, 2024, the program will feature Space Mountain turning into a Star Wars-themed hyperspace mountain. I've ridden that before, and trust me, it's really great. There will also be specialty food and beverage items. And finally, new adventures for Star Tours. They teased this a little bit at Star Wars Celebration in London, and now they're finally starting to unveil some of those new stories and adventures that you'll be able to experience in Star Tours in Disneyland. Now, no word yet on when those will be coming to Disney World, which I'm eagerly on the lookout for, but we'll hopefully get them soon. So be sure to get your tickets now for Disneyland, because I imagine that this festival will be quite popular. Finally, a new book was announced titled Star Wars: The Glass Abyss. It will be written by Stephen Barnes and will take place between the events of The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. The story will comprise of Mace Windu finishing the last mission of his fallen friend Qui-Gon Jinn. The book is slated for release on August 6th, 2024, and more information can be found on StarWars.com. So that is all the Star Wars, Lucasfilm, galaxy of all this fun adventure news that I was able to compile for this week. On the other side of this very short break, we'll be back with our discussion about Ahsoka Episode 4, The Fallen Jedi, featuring Dennis Keithley, Podcast Stardust. We'll be right back, folks. All right, everyone, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, and we are continuing our Ahsoka discussions here. And I'm so thrilled to welcome to the podcast, first-time guest on the show, co-host of Podcast Stardust, Dennis Keithley. Dennis, welcome to Force Ghost Conversations. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Anthony. Thank you so much for having me here. I've been looking forward to this all day. It gave me a perfect excuse to dive back into Ahsoka and binge the first 4 episodes, and so I'm really excited to talk about this.
Absolutely, and it's my pleasure to have you on the show. And this is the true gift of doing these episodes later than when they were released. So like that's really where my first question is for you here. Now that the series is out in its entirety, I mean, like, I want to first start with asking, like, what were your original thoughts? Because we talked off air. I don't actually know what your full thoughts are about the series at this point. And then how has that opinion changed now that some time has passed?
So when the series first came out, I watched it on a weekly basis, like most of us did, and enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it got better and better with each episode. Kind of peaked around episode 5, and then I mean, how do you follow that up with
Yeah.
Anakin's return, and then kind of tapered off a little bit that, and then had a really strong finish in episode 7. Uh, as the episodes were coming out, I was watching them multiple times each week, really diving into them and seeing what details I could absorb and figuring out how that related to everything else, enjoying all the various cameos and everything else that we got. And I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled with that series when it concluded. Since then, I've watched the entire thing one more time. So I've
Mm-hmm.
seen all these episodes 4 or 5 times, depending on which one it is. And I think it's fantastic. And it is a series that, we're not talking about the conclusion of this, but I was, when it ended, I was like, I have so many questions, and I wasn't sure I was happy with the way it did. But then upon reflection, I'm like, there's so many opportunities, and it puts us back in a position that we can speculate and guess and get into so much other Star Wars content that it relates to. And I just think it's a fantastic avenue for Star Wars discussion. So, if you listen to my podcast, you'll know that we rank this very high in our top
Mm-hmm.
10 of Star Wars stories for the year 2023, which we just put out. And yeah, I was really, really thrilled with it. And I think Dave Filoni did a fantastic job with it.
I'm gonna second what and yes and what you just said there. Like, I think that this series is phenomenal personally, but I will admit that when some of the episodes came out, I struggled with them. Either it maybe being a victim of the week to week release, perhaps, or just like, I needed a few watches myself in order to let the things sink in, right? Full spoiler alert for anybody at home, right? I mean, we're releasing these months after the series is released, so if you haven't seen it to this point, I don't know what I can do for you at this point. But like seeing like Anakin, and then just not just so much being wowed by Anakin, but thinking about the why. Why the series is called Ahsoka. How does seeing him impact her character arc? How does the Rebels characters being involved in the series move her arc further, right? This is not I personally I get a little upset and mad when I hear people say like this is just Rebels season 5, and I'm like, no, if they would have wanted to do Rebels
Mm.
season 5, they would have done Rebels season 5. This is Ahsoka. They just happen to have Rebels characters to help push her story forward. So I think
Mm-hmm.
I am if I had gotten on the microphone a bit more when and talking about Ahsoka and Star Wars when these were coming out, I may not have had the same tune that I'm having now talking about it, where I'm super gung ho and positive about it. But I think that's the benefit of doing this type of discussion later on. It's like we've let it sit, we've let it marinate. I've seen interviews now with Dave Filoni where he's explaining a lot of the stuff that went on with this series and some of the thought processes behind it. Heck, he's even gotten a promotion now at Lucasfilm because of I assume a lot of the work that he's done on this series and beyond with this work. So it's just I'm very happy to hear that it's only gotten much more positive in your viewpoint, and it already started off at a very positive point too, but it's only getting more. And I'm glad that because of this, you were able to go back and rewatch some of the episodes in preparation for this. So then we've talked a little bit about Filoni at this point, and that's where the next segue. I mean, it's a perfect segue into my next question for you here, and this is about the episode title. And in true Filoni fashion, the episode is titled "Fallen Jedi," and it can be interpreted in a variety of different ways. So I pose the question to you, Dennis: what do you think it means, Fallen Jedi?
That is such a big question, Anthony, because I think you're right. It can be interpreted several different ways, and I think it should be interpreted several
Mm-hmm.
different ways in this one. Of course, we've got Ahsoka, and we all know what her story was, that she left the Jedi Order. However, I'm not sure she is, in the strictest sense, what you'd call a quote unquote fallen Jedi, as much as she is a former Jedi.
Mm,
What you could say perhaps is that she is fallen from the path. You kind of have to resist that or be careful with that, because that kind of suggests someone who is gone to the dark side or something like that. Of
right.
course, there's
Yeah.
Balin Skull, who was a former Jedi. He's very much a fallen Jedi in this case, and I kind of like to think of it as falling off the path,
Mm,
and the doubts. And so much of this series, and I think it gets highlighted here, are Ahsoka and Balin. It's the two of them contemplating what is the legacy of the Jedi.
mm.
And so, in that sense, I think the word fallen is very important.
Yeah, that's really excellent what you say there. Like, I love that with the way your thought process goes with this is that it's the two sides of the coin, which is Balin and Ahsoka, right? These are kind of like the protagonist and antagonist of the series too. And it's like, is Jedi single or plural in this case, right? I think my brain goes immediately back to those 2017 conversations. The Last Jedi. What do they mean by it? Is it Luke? Is it
Yeah.
multiple Jedi? Are there several Jedi out there? Who are the Last Jedi? Who is the Last Jedi? And right, and even beyond that, maybe you could even say like Shinhati being an apprentice to a fallen Jedi. Is she also a fallen Jedi at this point? Sabine turned away from Jedi training. Is she technically a fallen Jedi? Anakin appears at the end, and he
Hmm.
might even be the most fallen of all the Jedi. So, like,
Very much
what?
so.
It's Filoni doing his most, like, I can just see him already, like, in an interview, just being like, yeah, I don't know about that one, and just like, maybe just like
Yeah.
twirling his thumbs, just being like, "Yeah, I did throw that in there, didn't I? I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm just going to make you ask questions about yourself and question everything about the episode and reinterpret it and watch it several times in order to figure out who." I think you're right on it that it is the two sides of the coin here because um, I find it so interesting in this series that it's like Ahsoka, in my opinion, at this point especially, is so unsure of herself and her purpose and where she's going. She's almost like a stagnant character, in my opinion. She doesn't really have like a journey or a goal or anything like that. I think she has like some semblance of a goal of what she's doing. Like she thinks like I have to do this because that's what you do, not because that's what I want to do. Versus Balin Skull is like the most sure person on the planet. Like even though he's not telling you his plan, he's like, yes, I am confident. This is what we must do. We must help them out here. This is the right path for us, right? So and they're both different aspects of why they fell from the Jedi Order, and they're still haunted by that in some ways. Like Balin is constantly talking about, it's a shame that you didn't get to see the Jedi Order as it once were, but it had to dissolve, right? And then Ahsoka's like, I walked away because of how they treated me and disrespected me and harmed me, and I had to walk away from that. So it's just Filoni being Filoni. It is truly most Filoni-esque. I think as soon as the episode title came out, my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, "Yep, that's a Filoni title." But I
Yeah.
really appreciated your thoughts on that one. That's a good way to view the title of this one, as well as we could probably do a whole episode discussion on every single episode title of this series and the multiple meanings of it all. But I want to dive into a bit more of the nitty
Right.
gritty of this
This.
episode. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the alternate title for this could have been like, "What's eating Ahsoka Tano?" And we
Yeah.
don't really get what the question is, what the theme of this series is, until the next episode. But we get like all the hints in this one, which is
Mm,
when
mm,
uh, Balin says to Ahsoka, "Your legacy is death and destruction, and it didn't have to come to this. But you just don't know any other way." And then it's when we get Anakin shows up, he's teasing the fact that we're actually going to get the question what the series is really about in the next episode. But
mm.
everything is leading up to this, and we just don't know until we get beyond this episode exactly what the series is really about and why it is that Ahsoka is just so distant and off for 4 episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% right. 100% right. Like this is the ultimate setup episode for the climax of answers that you kind of get in the next one, which are also shrouded by a litany of Filoniisms and questions along the way in order to make you think
Yeah.
about what the actual meaning is. But we'll get to that in next week's discussion, folks. um, so within this episode, there's a ton of different action and frankly, this is probably the most meat of the episode is about the big lightsaber battles that happen in here. But before all that, Hu Yang has some sage and almost prophetic advice for Ahsoka and Sabine, which is stay together. Why, in your opinion, do they almost immediately not heed his warning? I mean, it's fairly clear, if you ask me, to stay together, and then moments later, they're going off in separate directions.
Well, that's a very good question. And I remember when I watched this, they make a big show, and Ahsoka says, "Well, we need to get going," and then Sabine says, "Together." She really emphasizes that word. So they run off after their enemies, and then they pair off. Ahsoka versus Marak and Sabine versus Shen, and then they immediately split apart. And I remember sitting
Mm-hmm.
straight up on the couch and it's like, "Did you all just forget what you said a moment ago?" And uh, it's it was frustrating at the time because that was one of the big issues we knew was coming in here, was that there is something that's standing in the way of that
Mm-hmm.
relationship of master and apprentice, that they were unable to get past the first go round, and now it's getting in the way this go around. And the episode starts with Hyang, not with Hyang, I'm sorry, Ahsoka basically asking Sabine, "Is like, am I going to be able to trust you when it comes down to it? And we got to get that map, and it mean if and to prevent Thrawn from coming back, and we can't stop them otherwise. Are you going to be able to destroy this thing?" And Sabine tries to deflect the question, and then Ahsoka
Mm-hmm.
asks it again. And so it was very much a necessary plot device in this episode,
Yeah.
because Ahsoka does not quite get where Sabine is coming from, and does not understand the attachment that Sabine has to Ezra and her past, and that's the last key, or whole the last hold on the past that she has, after
Mm-hmm.
we find out that she's lost her family and stuff. So it's kind of they don't really know how to work together, and they don't know that they can really trust each other. And Balin even plays off that some, especially when he's talking to Sabine later in the episode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I echo your sentiment of how you reacted to this sequence, because if I recall correctly, I think I might have been standing on the couch saying, "What are you doing?" He literally said, "Don't separate, stay together. You work best together," in his opinion. But you probably all of us would agree you'd be better together. It leads to the other things that happen in this episode, which we'll get to in a few minutes here. But it's it just goes, it shows again, it's kind of what you were saying there. It's just the wedge between them literally is shown here because of what, the plot device, as you mentioned, that they're alluding to here, right? This lack of trust. They've physically put space between them to showcase the mental space, that the empathy walls that they don't have for each other at this point. The conversations that they're not having are showcased in a physical sense in the space and distance between each other, which I thought was a very good job on Filoni's part. But as a fan, yes, the most frustrating thing in the world when you're like, "I want you guys to succeed, but you're not. You're not." It's just,
Mm-hmm.
makes you mad and angry. I just can't. Uh, Still makes me mad to this day to think about it. Even when I was rewatching, I was rewatching on. It was a good thing. I was rewatching at the gym actually, and I was on the treadmill as I was able to let my frustrations out in a positive way. So so it worked out good for me in the end there. Um, but yeah, let's talk a little bit about Merrick, and Ahsoka makes quick work of taking him out, or them out. I'm not sure if we ever got a gender for Merrick. So, did you get? Since I didn't want listen to the episodes yet for Podcast Stardust, I want to ask about the Merrick hype. And did you happen to get caught up in the Merrick hype? And now that we know what happens to the character, do you have any speculation as to who or what they are?
Well, it is a he. They did refer to him in the
Oh,
masculine in
okay,
some of the
great.
earlier episodes, so I do know that. But um, not really. Not really got him high. I mean, it was neat seeing another Inquisitor in there.
Hmm.
I know that this is not the first time that we saw something like what happened to Merrick when Ahsoka slashes him across his chest and he kind of explodes and deflates.
Hmm.
We saw that at the end of Tales of the Jedi with that episode where she confronted that other Inquisitor, and so something happened there.
Mm.
But it made for fun discussion. Is this Night Sister magic? Is this some other dark side magic? What is this creature? Is it one of these plasmoid type creatures that we've got introduced to in the High Republic, and it went bad after it took a lightsaber to the gut, or whatever
Mm.
the case may be? Um, I just loved the fight between Ahsoka and Marak. For as short as it was, it reminded me of Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Maul at the end of
Mm.
season two. Yeah, season two of Rebel, or three of Rebels. The Twilight of the Apprentice episode, and Obi-Wan, one block, one slash, and they're done. And very much the old samurai motif there, where most
Oh
of the
yeah.
fighting is done in the few moments before they actually swing at each other. So I thought it was fantastic.
That's a great pool that you shared there. I didn't even think about that. The Tales of the Jedi episode that does have the same end for the Inquisitor character, in that with the little green whatever ooze coming out of the body that it is. Like, yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
funny how, like, as soon as a mysterious character comes out in Star Wars, like, well, is it Merrick or is it someone else? Uh, is it Ezra? Is it Snoke?
Yeah.
Right? Everyone just constantly just starts speculating wildly about it, and I'm like, I think I try my best not even like entertain those discussions, because I was like, it's just Merrick, right? Let's not get too far down the line here.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as I saw that stuff come out of him, and then later on with the Night Sisters, seeing literally them raising up armies of stormtrooper zombie esque creatures, I thought, maybe there's something there on that one. I think Filoni, again, if we talk we talk about him, where he just puts stuff in there that, like, makes people ask questions and think through things. Like, is Merrick just one of those characters again where he's like, this will be good for the fans to just think about. This will send them on a wild goose
Yeah.
chase for a couple weeks. They'll think through this one, and then we'll showcase him dying in a very interesting way, with just a little hints here of what it could possibly be, and then let them speculate for years on end about it. Yeah, they'll have a good time with that. And I agree with what you say about the lightsaber, especially just this episode too is just riddled with great lightsaber action. But the choreography is so much that samurai style of fighting that Filoni certainly is a big fan of, and it just is reminiscent so much of those Kurosawa samurai films that inspired Lucas to even start this whole thing back in the day too. So great pulls and all that stuff there. Um, so, like I said, there are several lightsaber duels in this episode, but eventually, you fast forward several of those. Ahsoka is defeated by Balin's skull and tossed into the water there. And Sabine is left with a very important choice. She can either give up the map to Peridia and give it back to Balin, and then potentially have a chance to save Ezra, while at the same time potentially allowing Thrawn's return, or to destroy it and keep another war from happening. So the question here is, what do you make of her choice? And is it fair to pin everything that happens afterwards all on her?
So it's hard to answer this question having seen the rest of the series and
Hmm.
not and try to isolate what's going on in this moment. But trying to put myself in her head, we talked about this a bit earlier. Giving up Ezra, which is something that she has been looking forward to, hoping for, striving for what, over a decade at
At
this
least a
point,
decade, yeah.
is just, yeah, is just such a huge, huge hurdle for her. And this is what Ahsoka was foreshadowing with Sabine, at the beginning of the episode. Like, when it comes down to this moment, are you going to be able to do it? And Sabine wants to believe she can. but she knows deep down she knew she was never going to be able to do that, and she tried to bluff Balin on this, but
Mm,
Balin, I mean, it was written all over her face, and somehow Balin knew about Ezra and the ability and this opportunity, and you could explain that all kinds of different ways. Don't need to theory craft on that, but and he basically calls her out on this. He's like, you should do what your master said, but I'm going to you basically do what your master did, and that's trust you, and we
mm,
can make this alliance, and you can get there, and you can see your friend. And there was that was just the position she was in. There was no other decision to make for her. You could not put her in that decision. And if we're going to blame Sabine, then we also have to heap a healthy dose of that blame on Ahsoka, because she knew this. She confesses to Huyang later that, you know, I shouldn't have put her in this position. She was not ready for this.
mm,
And well, you knew that. You knew that going in,
mm,
but you put her in that position anyway. So no, it's not solely on Sabine. I don't think it's entirely fair to blame everything that happens that follows on her. Um, but even then, well, again, we're going to be getting into future episodes, so I kind of want to limit what I'm saying to here what this is. But yeah, I just don't know, given everything that preceded this, her, driving off Shin, and then showing up here, seeing her master just get thrown over a cliff. So she's had another tragedy in her life, a
mm.
life filled with loss. You throw that one on top of it, and now you're asking her to give up her only opportunity to see someone that she cherishes, and that's a bridge too far.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a really good empathetic look at Sabine at this, especially at this time and juncture of where the episode takes place at. I really like too that you added that note about Ahsoka feeling like, taking some ownership too of the choice that she makes there, because that's something I personally didn't even think about when putting together this episode, the notes for it that I had and all that. And um it's interesting too that we talk, I've talked in the last couple of episodes and discussing about Ahsoka maybe not being the best teacher, and I think that's also another aspect of maybe that her being a failure on that front is, not putting her in a place to succeed, right? Not knowing that she wasn't ready yet for that big of a test. In the sports world, you hear coaches after a big loss all the time being like, I got to put my players in a better position in order to win. And this is almost
Mm-hmm.
like the Star Wars example of that coming into fruition, where there Ahsoka's now at a post game interview with Hu Yang being like, I should have never put her in a position where she had to make such a choice like that. Where again, you are tackling some of the big complex emotions of Ezra tasked me with this. If he, who knows where he's out there in another galaxy, evidently, and who knows what, with Thrawn, if he's even surviving out there, is he barely scraping by? She doesn't know anything that we know later on that eventually is the case. And I think too, with making the decision to give them, it offers the chance that maybe they could also stop Thrawn there too. It's no guarantee that he automatically comes back afterwards too. Um, so I think in my head, immediately after watching this episode, I thought about Star Lord in Avengers: Infinity War, where he, uh, I think he's given very much so all of the blame in letting Thanos succeed, correct? Because they're right there, able to almost inches away from taking off the Infinity Gauntlet and not letting him run rampant and snapping his fingers and tearing away half the universe. So that one is a bit more heavily handed on blaming one person for the events that happen afterwards, but this one has a lot more nuance to it that I'm glad that you brought to the table here, so thank you for that.
Of course.
um, and then this episode concludes, and this is my last question too. So let's spend some time on this one a bit here. This one concludes with a familiar face and voice reappearing, and it is none other than the return of Anakin Skywalker. Dennis, how did you react when you first saw this cliffhanger, and where did you think the episode or the next episode would go from there?
Okay, so I try to steer clear of rumors and things when it comes to these shows and Star Wars movies and everything coming out, because I want to experience them in the way that the directors, the creators, the producers intended for us to see them. And so this was very much intended to be a surprise at the end of the episode. Not so much cliffhanger, but hey, tune in next week and find out what this is
Hmm.
about. That being said, I can't remember where I came across the information that Hayden Christensen was coming back and he was going to be in Ahsoka. And what can you do? It just shows up somehow on your Twitter feed or X feed or whatever it's called anymore, and
Hmm.
and so you just kind of put that away. That being said, I was like, oh, we're going to get another Kenobi flashback. That was what I was expecting to see out of Anakin
Hmm.
Skywalker in this series because that's what they just did. I did not expect that to be in a world between worlds setting, and I did not expect for it to happen this way at all. And so when that happened, I just remember smiling really, really big. And, that was such a great reveal with, we get the overhead view of the cliff and the hinge where they were figuring out the coordinates to get to Peridia. And then it goes into the water. We see the waves, and all of a sudden they're lapping up against Ahsoka's arm. And then it turns into the starfield. Very beautiful, incredibly artistically done. She stands up. We hear those echoes of Anakin's voice before it gets clear, and he's calling her Snips. And so, that was a nice touch. It hits you
Hmm.
right in the heartstrings with that one. So that was fantastic, a fantastic reveal. I don't know what it is though about the appearance of Hayden on that one and it's completely different from the way it is in the next episode, but it looks kind of plasticky. And so I thought they'd done a lot of digital de-aging and reconstructing of his face the first time I saw that. And I remember being critical of that he
Hmm.
made him look fine when we saw him as Anakin in Kenobi. So what's going on here? But of course, it ended up not being an issue by the time I got to the next episode. So yeah, I thought that was a fantastic reveal. I was very floored that we were going back to the World Between Worlds, or at least at the time, what appeared to be World Between Worlds setting, and it was kind of a jaw dropping moment, even knowing that he was going to appear in this series at some point.
Yeah, I think there was maybe like a TV spot or something like that too that had some voiceover that would eventually be used in a later episode when the with the training sequence too that like definitely
Yeah.
spoiled potentially the return of Anakin in more ways than one. And that poor Hayden Christensen for those months leading up to this was just assaulted with questions about Ahsoka. Every time he was like at Disneyland or something like that, trying to ride a ride with his kids or at a con or something like that, he's getting, you in Ahsoka? Are you in Ahsoka? How's that Ahsoka thing going? I think he just at a certain point just stopped answering and just started shrugging in regards to his involvement in the series. I think I had the same response that you did too. And at first seeing the face, right, I was like, did it look like they like almost took like some like sandpaper, like tried to buff out his face a little bit, it looked too shiny and sleek and all that stuff. I was like, that doesn't look like a real face to me,
Mm-hmm.
but they certainly fixed that in the subsequent episode. I mean, episode 5, preceding this one or following this one is I, I think they did very little, if any, de aging to him. It looked like at all. Maybe just makeup and all that stuff. I mean, that looked like Hayden literally walked right out of the set of Revenge of the Sith and walked right onto the set of Ahsoka, and from
Yeah.
2005 all the way up to 2022, whenever they filmed this, and just that line, "Hey Snips" or "Hello Snips," all that, and uh, just seeing the response on Rosario's face too to portray that first time we see these two characters looking at each other in live action. I think there should be a lot of credit given to her as well for playing that off so well to be like, wow, like this is my master again. Also, my master as I saw him before, not potentially 40
Mm-hmm.
plus year old Anakin that that Luke sees at the end of Return of the Jedi. It's all burned up. Uh, so like it's just it was a magical moment. I think for me, especially being a person that loved the prequels, and just it's wonderful being in this Hayden Renaissance that we live in right now. The prequels are being ignited with so much fervor and enjoyment that they probably have never gotten before in their existence. You and I were at the Attack of the Clones panel where Hayden came out and was given a
Yeah.
standing ovation. Um, you know, I you we loved the Kenobi series and the fact that he was involved with that to a large degree, and he's going to all these cons, and that pre 2017, hey, you couldn't even sniff Hayden Christensen going to one of those fan conventions, right? And now the character and the actor is getting such a renaissance and love that they have never had before, which is just so amazing. And of course, it leads to the next episode, which is just mind blowing, bonkers, incredible, with everything between flashback sequences, Clone Wars, Rex, uh, Siege of Mandalore, Anakin training, a little bit of Vader sequences, whales flying off into space, Chopper and Hera. Like it's just amazing. But I think without this setup episode, like we talked about in this, you don't get the payoff of all of that. Without every one of these episodes leading up to this, you don't get the big explosion of emotion that you get with this episode, or even episode 6 and 7, right, where you get the Thrawn of it all, and all that comes into play here. So it's just a fantastic time to be a Star Wars fan, especially for people like us that have followed just about everything. Right, you're reading books, you're reading comic books,
Yeah.
you're watching the series, you're watching the animated stuff. It's not just a Saturday morning cartoon. You're dissecting it. You're looking for the themes and having these great discussions. So that's it's a great way to. It's like the perfect cliffhanger. Like I was like, how do I just wait another week? How do I wait another week
Yeah.
to experience what is coming up next? I mean, talk about the greatest trailer ever in a way. Like you, if I wasn't already glued to my seat 5 minutes before, I was glued to my seat 10 minutes before now, just refreshing Disney Plus to see if it would perhaps come out a little bit early and all that. So it's just a great episode. Dennis, do you have any other concluding thoughts on episode 4 of Ahsoka: Fallen Jedi?
Just a couple things. Actually, now while you were talking about it, I remember when Rosario spilled the beans that Hayden was going to be on the show, and I remember our mutual friend. I was talking to Coley Mead and pointed out that she's kind of the Tom Holland of the Star Wars universe, and that she can't keep a secret to save her life. But it was on social media. She says, see you soon. In reference to something with Hayden, and
Yeah.
that got taken down. But yeah, this was fantastic. I remember right after this, they had that fan event for episode
Yep.
5 where they were showing it in select theaters, and there was one here in Dallas. And after this, I was frantically trying to get tickets but couldn't. Which is okay. It's still fun to watch it with family here at the house. And beyond that, just seeing World Between Worlds again that was not something I expected to show up in another Star Wars property ever, because it was something that I think had so much careful control placed around it. And so to see that, and they haven't confirmed precisely that that's what that was, but I
Yeah.
don't feel like there's a whole lot of room for doubt in my mind. But at any rate, it was something. I mean, that was one of those episodes where this one and the next one afterwards, just like, wow, the possibilities are endless after this. Where are we going with this? And
Hmm.
Dave is so coy when he talks about all these things, and he left us with that gift of this episode and the next one, just some incredible Star Wars storytelling that really did some fantastic things.
Couldn't agree more. And now that Dave's at the helm of Lucasfilm, let's see where the gates go, where the avenues of different directions of projects can possibly go. What new characters and existing characters can be infused into existing stories and stories to come. I think this is just a very exciting time to be a Star Wars fan. And of course, we're going to be here to discuss and enforce those conversations, but I can almost guarantee you podcast artists will certainly be there to talk about it as well. So, Dennis, where can the fine folks find you online, and where can they listen to Podcast Artist at?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Anthony. And thanks again for having me with this. It's always so much fun to get to go on other people's podcasts and talk about Star Wars a little bit. And getting the invitation to do this has been the highlight of the day, the highlight of the week for me. Been looking forward to it. Like I said, just got an opportunity to binge these episodes and then come talk to you about it. I had a great time when you were on my show earlier this year talking about Return of the Jedi. And so, yeah, Podcast Stardust is available on all your podcatchers. We come out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, usually doing episodes covering some sort of review, some sort of a discussion, and then news at the end of the week. And you can find us on all the social media. Well, all social media for now at Podcast Artists, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And yeah, come and hear what we have to say. It's find people like Anthony here all the time, and we love putting it out.
Absolutely, and I'll give a plug for myself. For Podcast Artist is probably one of the only podcasts that talk all things Star Wars, comics, books, the TV shows, movies, all that stuff, and deep dive discussions. Like I want to do a big plug here for like the Return of the Jedi series that you all have done recently. They're like all what is it, up to 9 parts now, if I'm mistaken. Where you're just taking a chunk of the film, like 10 to 15 minutes, and just doing a really great deep dive of that. Like that's the stuff that is just so awesome, and I just want to applaud you for that great work. So certainly go check out Podcast Stardust on the podcatchers that you find podcasts. And of course, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode in the Force Ghost Conversations realm, and you can assume it'll be all about Ahsoka episode 5. And we have a brand new guest, we're not a brand new guest, but a returning guest coming on the show, Ross Hollowman, who actually got to see it in the theater when it did come out, as Dennis alluded to. So we'll be very excited to hear about his experience and to chat through that episode in full detail. So until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.